So here we go. So ABACUS 4.3, it came out about a week ago. It's in general release now. Today I'm going to talk about the major features that we've released in this release. So there's 10 of those, and so I'll sort of walk through each of those. As we do whenever we release a new release of the product, though, we take the opportunity to update all of our libraries, all of our documentation, all of our training courses, all of our tutorials. So that's sort of, that documentation side of thing, the help manual, of course, that's all been updated as well. So there's a number of new libraries or frameworks we've deployed with this release. The ABACUS library itself has been updated. That's one that is a hybrid anyway. It uses frameworks like TOGAF and business process modeling notation and some other standards from the OMG as well. We've updated the Archimate libraries since ABACUS 4.2. Archimate's come out with some new versions of their standard. We've added a few new libraries as well, so ITIL version 3's gone in, some transit libraries, so TRAC is a transit authority one, the UK reference architecture, so that's a UK government architecture. It has content, of course, as you'd expect in a reference architecture. There's been lots of other ones that have been added as well, but they're the sort of headline ones. And there's been well over 100 other things that have been done, little minor fixes and enhancements and things as well, beyond the sort of 10 that we're talking about. Okay, so let's have a look. This is the sort of shopping list of features. I'm assuming you've all, well, maybe you have, maybe you haven't downloaded 4.3. In the release notes for 4.3, it lists these 10 features and gives a lot more detail on them, so don't worry about that. These slides, of course, can be available. If you want a copy of these slides, that's fine. We're recording this as well, so of course we'll send you a link to that so you can share it with all your colleagues. But need to say these are the 10 main features we're presenting in ABACUS 4.3. I'm going to go through each of these individually now, so I won't spend too much time on each one right here. You can see though that it's generally we sort of class it as a productivity, usability, aesthetics kind of release. So there's been a lot of enhancements that of course make things easier, we think make people more productive, and indeed from the aesthetic point of view make things just look nicer as well. So it's one of those subjective things, but nonetheless we've spent a lot of effort on those to try and improve the quality of the outcomes and the quality of the outputs from ABACUS. Right, so let's get into these. Let's have a look at each of these features now. So the first headline feature we're talking about is what we call replicas. So there's lots of different names that you might use for this. Duplicates, ghosts is another word we've heard people say. So basically what it is allowing you to show the same component from the repository on one diagram many times. Okay, so what that basically means is you've always been able to show the same component on many diagrams, so of course as you'd expect with a repository-based tool, but you're able to show the same component more than once on a diagram. Okay, so here you can see in this example we've got this intranet component here twice. Okay, so it's replicated. That indeed is the same repository element. Okay, just being shown twice. Okay, so of course any change you make to one of these would be reflected in the other one. Obviously if you changed its name or something like that. If you're using color is reflecting a property, of course each of them would update, if you've updated the property regardless of where you may do it. So what we're seeing here though is this ability to show an element graphically multiple times on a diagram. Now how's that useful? The primary use case for that we've found is in these sort of diagrams, which people often call a landscape diagram, it's essentially trying to communicate, in this case, what application is used by what department to deliver or fulfill what service. Okay, so of course in a many-to-many model you'd expect that a given application could be delivering many services, indeed a given application can be being used by many departments, so that many-to-many relationship could be shown by placing, of course here, the applications in kind of a matrix view like this. So we're here saying the intranet is being used by both so the strategies and operations department to do both strategy, and actually that one under there is operations and HR. So you're essentially saying that this application is used in many places by potentially many people. So it's a very useful feature. We see that time and time again now as a way to communicate this many-to-many relationship in a diagram. Okay, so that's one of the main uses of this replica feature. I'll show you how this works. This is obviously one of our headline features. I'll show you how this works when I do the live demo towards the end. The other use case for replicas, the main thing, is when you want to start connecting to components, obviously where you have lines going into components, to minimize the the crossing of lines and things like that. People often want to put the component right next to where the originator of a line may be. So what they do here, and you can see in this example, we've got the ERP HRM application being replicated, so it's being shown twice here. You've got a line going here between this process step and then some lines going from these process steps. So we're showing this without crossing over the lines and things like that. So again, these are exactly the same component in the repository. We're just showing it twice on the diagram to try and minimize the amount of crossovers of lines and things like that. So it's a it's a graphically useful feature. It absolutely aids in the readability of diagrams, and yeah, one of the headline features of ABACUS 4.3. Just going to take a quick pause. So I've seen lots of people join since I started. So thank you for all of you who've joined. Thank you for going on to mute. I guess you know the rules. So yep, absolutely. We are taking questions, but take them through the chat window. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat window. We should have time at the end to get to those. If not, we can come directly to you. This is also being recorded, so feel free to share the recording with your colleagues. We'll provide the link to it to all of you. It'll be available through our Evolution .tv, which is a YouTube channel. We'll give you the link for that at the end as well. But yep, absolutely. Thank you for joining, and we've only just started, so we've just sort of gone through the first of the 10 features, which is this replicas one. And yeah, I'll move on to the second one. So the next feature that I'm going to talk about here is one that's it's essentially it's a new type of constraint, which you would know as a way that you can set up rules within your meta model. So it's a topological kind of rule. This is something that's relevant to people who are designers. So again, if you're familiar with the designing capabilities of ABACUS, where you configure meta models and you set up new component types and connection types and new properties, and you set up rules that govern the way that those things can be connected, this is of particular interest to you. So this enhancement is essentially the ability to be very specific about the way that you attach connections. Okay, so you'd be familiar, if you're a designer, you'd be familiar with this dialog which talks about the 4 different types of topological rules you can set up. So when we look at this one down here, this is a rule which is basically saying that if I have a connection, I can, or I should, or I must be attached to a certain type of component. So previously in ABACUS, you were able to specify what source component types you could connect a given connection type to, and you could specify what sink or other end connection component types you could also attach a connection to. Now that was fine if you had only one source and many sinks, or one sink and many sources, but when you end up having multiple source types and multiple sink types, that potentially was a bit imprecise, because you then couldn't necessarily specify which given pairing of those component types you needed to have. So that's what this feature is about. May sound complicated. In practice, it's actually pretty simple. So for example, if you have this supports relationship type, you're able to now say, well, if there's a strategy at the one end, it has to be an objective at the other end. Okay? If there's a goal at one end, then it has to be a vision at the other end. And for example, if you have a capability at one end, it has to be a goal at the other end. So of course there's 3 source types, 3 sink types, but we've now paired them up. Okay? So you can still do all that OR logic, you can still have the combinatorial logic, but needless to say, you can be very precise about that. Now, where's this feature useful? So basically, we talk about 3 types of meta models. There's a whole presentation we give that sort of classifies frameworks and meta models into 3 types. We talk about a balanced meta model. Now, a balanced meta model is one that has about the same number of component types as it has connection types. Okay, and we can go into the whole theory of that, but needless to say, there's a whole presentation on this. Then we talk about over-precise meta models. They're ones that have significantly more connection types than component types. Okay, so what you're doing is you're essentially describing the relationship between things with multiple kind of types. So for example, the relationship between maybe departments and applications. It could be that a department owns an application, a department uses an application, a department supports an application. So you've got multiple relationships between the same 2 types. Okay, we refer to those as over-precise. So there's a couple of frameworks that certainly are guilty of that. MODAF is the most notable of those. Then the other end of the spectrum is what we call overloaded meta models or frameworks. So they're ones that have significantly more component types than connection types. Okay, so they're ones where you tend to be a bit more vague or ambiguous about the relationships between things. It's where you invariably start just saying, well, kind of everything supports everything else, or everything uses everything else. Okay, so you're a bit more vague about the relationship types. So you have, again, multiple component types and not too many connection types. Okay, so this feature is particularly useful for that type of framework, these overloaded frameworks where you've overloaded a connection type, so you have to be able to be precise about what the pairing is. Okay. Again, I guess I'd mention the most guilty framework for that is Archimate. I mean, Archimate tends to use, realized by a lot, and so of course you need to be able to pair up the start and the end of those. Anyway, it's a very useful feature, again, very useful for people who are designers and want to be a bit more precise about how they set up the rules in their framework. Okay, number 3, there's a whole lot of enhancements we've done to matrices. I mean, matrices were only added a few versions ago, so we've had really good feedback on them, so thank you for that. We've been working on them hard. We've even got new features that we're rolling out in the next release as well, so they're certainly one of our core kind of dimensions to the product. So the first one that I'll talk about here for matrices in 4.3 is, if you're familiar with creating what we call indirect matrices, so an indirect matrix is one where you specify kind of a starting set of components, so maybe your services, and an ending set of components, so maybe your departments. Then you specify what we call a path in between those. So it will now show intermediate components. We call those path components or intermediate components. So these are basically the components that are connected between these things with, in this case, specified relationship types as well. So again, you can have ORs and combinations and things like that, but basically we're saying here that, for example, the website, the CRM, and the IVR are 3 applications that are on the path between this department and that service. So it's very similar to that landscape view I showed you back with replicas. It's basically showing the things in between in a path. Okay, so that's an indirect matrice. What we've now been able to do is show properties relevant to the path components. So here we've got a little color token. So in this case, it's actually the recommendation or the status for these applications. So we're showing some portfolio results here where we're saying, hey, look, this IVR application is going to get retired. That might be what red means. The orange or yellow might mean that it's going to be, reinvested or something like that. Green might be it's, retained, but whichever portfolio methodology you're using, you can communicate that, let's say. And you can also show an actual property value in the label here as well. So like with catalogs, very similar feature if you've done any coloring or showing properties in catalog columns, basically exactly the same UI, it's just showing it for the path components here. So very powerful. It gives you some very quick analytics around impact analysis and dependency analysis, because you can see that of course these two things are dependent, yet we're planning to retire everything. So it gives you a pretty quick feeling of, hang on, that dependency is going to be changing over time, and needless to say you get into all your road mapping side of things then. The other aspect with direct matrices, so a direct matrix is one where you only have a single connection type between 2 types of components. So here we might have the list of applications across the left, and then servers across the top, and we're showing the is hosted at. So this is basically, this application runs on that server. Okay. Now what we're able to do here with these direct matrices is show a property from the connection. Okay, so this is a connection property from this is hosted at. This in this case is the environment property. So clients often put a dev prod test, that kind of live sort of influence, because that's a property of the relationship. In fact, it's not a property of the server. It certainly shouldn't be. So they can show that right now. You can show it right there in the actual matrices. So instead of showing an X like you used to see, you can actually show the property value there. So in this case, they're all live. These servers are all the live servers for these applications. And then the cell is colored according to a property as well, which again can be a different property. In this case, it's actually the cost. So we've done a cost model here, and so we're attributing the cost of these servers to these applications. So you can see that this application's not consuming as much cost as this application. So red is a bigger cost. Okay, so with direct matrices, you can show color and properties again. Another feature with matrices is this ability to directly edit these properties on the connections. Okay, so if you have a direct matrix with just a connection type here, you can double click these cells and it'll bring up this editing window. So if it's a list property, it'll give you a pick list of values. If it's an integer, obviously you get a value where you can set the actual value. It's really good, really efficient way of setting properties on connections, using the matrices to do that. Of course, if that property is linked to the color, then the color changes instantly as well, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You can certainly set the properties up. Okay, the other one I'll just talk about here with matrices, you're able to push them out of the tool very easily now. So you can push them out to Microsoft Excel, you can publish them to HTML. So if you've done any publishing with 4.3, you'll see that it all comes out with sort of paging and filters and all these kind of things in the published models. So you're able to get your content out there and then start to do your own reporting as well against these things. So absolutely you can share that with the broader user group. Okay, moving on. Number 4. So yeah, we've got a few to go. May seem simple. Absolutely, it's been very requested, and finally we've delivered it. Being able to change the color of the font labels. So whether your connections or components, you're able to now set the color. So the color is particularly useful. If you've got a dark colored shape, you can put a light colored label on it. If you've got lines that are crossing over, dark colored backgrounds, and you want to show the label on the connection, of course you can use a light colored label now. So yeah, basically being able to change the font colors, it's a surprisingly aesthetically nice feature. You're also able to set the link colors. So as you'd know with any box or any line on Abacus, you can have a hyperlink on it. So rather than just good old blue, you can set the link color as well to be something else. So of course, if you've again got a dark colored shape, you'll be able to read the hyperlinked version of the labels as well just fine. So that's it. So it's just set up like that. You set it up in the stencil or you set it up in the viewpoint, just the same as you do for anything around a diagram or a viewpoint. The next one, number 5, this is about copying configurations and also sometimes content across architectures. Okay, so I know some big words there. Look, basically, in Abacus, you're able to have multiple architectures in a repository. Okay, so whether those architectures are a current state and then various target state or project architectures, whether it's historical ones to look at where we were in 2013 versus 2014, there's lots of different alternatives to how you might want to use multiple architectures, and indeed there's white papers and things about that we can share with you. So from a methodology point of view, that's certainly something we recommend. Now you're able to start moving content between those architectures much more easily. You were always able to copy components and connections and things like that quite easily, but now we've given you the ability from various views to copy across architectures. So the first one to look at are catalogs and matrices. So remembering that catalogs and matrices are really just a configuration. And so what I mean by that is you specify that, hey, I want to see all the applications and I want to see these columns for the application. So maybe it's the the application owner, and maybe it's the the department that's kind of supporting it and things like that. What you can do now is you can copy one catalog, you can copy a catalog from one architecture to another architecture. So here from the 2013 one to the 2014 one. What that does is copy the configuration of the catalog. It doesn't copy all the rows, which, as you know, a row is each kind of component in the repository. It just copies the configuration across. So of course, the instances that you have in that architecture, so let's say there's applications in that architecture as well, will instantly render in that catalog with whatever that configuration is. So whatever those columns are that you've set up, and the ordering and the coloring and the filtering and the sorting and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very quick way of starting to share catalogs across different architectures. So if someone's doing some work in a project architecture and they've come up with a really good way of viewing content through a catalog, you can instantly put that back into the baseline architecture, or indeed any other architecture that you want to do. Same applies for matrices. So all that work I was showing you about, setting up coloring and all those sort of things, you can easily transform that and port it across architectures now. But again, it's just the configuration of the matrices. There's nothing to do with content there. Bring us to diagrams, however. Diagrams now in Abacus 4.3, you're able to copy diagrams across architectures. Now just spend a second thinking about that. A diagram has configuration, because effectively you've said what shapes do I want to use, what colors do I want to use for properties, all that kind of stuff. It has then content on it, of course, with XY positions of the boxes, but also the boxes that are on those, or whether the circles, whatever they are, but the content that's on the actual diagram. So when you copy a diagram from one architecture to another architecture, it will add new content to that other architecture. Okay, so all of the components and connections that were on that actual diagram will get added to the other architecture. So there will be some housekeeping you need to do there, because you're going to want to merge common content with existing content. So you do the caution for using this feature, which is absolutely advisable, is start to use permissions to control this a little bit, because if people can copy a diagram, which is the create permission when you set up permissions, then they obviously can copy it to the clipboard to start with, and then if they have the ability within an architecture to add content, so if the architecture is not read-only, so it's an architecture they can put content into, they potentially can be adding content into other architectures. So start to think carefully about whether people are able to copy diagrams, which is the create permission directly on the diagram itself, which of course you set on the viewpoint. You don't have to do it individually on the diagrams. You can set it on the viewpoint that you don't want people to be copying diagrams across architectures, basically, if you don't want them to. Needless to say, it's a very powerful feature, though, for those who need it, which is to copy content exactly across architectures. If someone's drawn a great solution architecture for some new set of functionality in a project architecture, and you want to put that content back into the baseline, or you want to put it into another alternative architecture, you just copy and paste it now. Very simple, very powerful. Okay, number 6. This feature's a surprisingly powerful feature. It's something that we've already had. The product's been in beta for a few months, so we've already had some fantastic feedback on this feature. What it essentially is it allows ABACUS to use an external ID or an external key as the master key actually in ABACUS. Right, so what does that mean? So let's say, for example, you're working with a CMDB. You've got your configuration management database, you've got a long list of servers, and of course that CMDB has its own master key. It's got an asset number or something that's a unique key. What you can do now is you can specify that field. So in this case, this column here, you can specify that field as the master key from ABACUS's point of view. What that means, when we synchronize ABACUS with that third-party repository or the catalog or the Excel spreadsheet or the SharePoint list or whatever it is that you're using as the master, we can actually override any internal IDs that ABACUS uses and use that external ID. What does that mean in practice? It means in practice you don't have to add an ABACUS ID to that third-party repository. Okay, so that third-party repository doesn't have to have any concept that you're going to go and put this content into ABACUS. We can absolutely just use its native ID when we come and do the synchronization with ABACUS. So incredibly powerful. What that means, ABACUS can become that hub, that information hub very easily. It will just consume everything that you want to try and plug into it faithfully. Any new rows that get added from the other repository will instantly be recognized as a new row because the ID doesn't exist, of course, in ABACUS. So it will add those rows. Very, very powerful way, and a very quick way of course, aggregating different data sets into a whole very quickly. And ABACUS then becomes your hub, which of course has the the end-to-end view of your business, which is of course the thing we're all aiming for. So really powerful feature, very easy to do, nonetheless incredibly useful. Okay, number 7. We've always been able to do audit trails, so you've always been able to go and inspect the changes that were done in a repository. So as you know, you're using version control behind the scenes, so every change is recorded. You're able to go back through and generate reports and things. So what we're doing here is we've given the ability to recursively search for changes. So what that basically means is when you're looking in the Explorer view, you can click anywhere you want in the Explorer and choose to do a recursive search the whole way down. So you might even do right at the top level of the architecture and just say, hey, between 2 given revisions, which might be 2 given dates, I want to find every change that's happened, and it's now every change in the repository whatsoever. And you'll get, quite a long list. It does take a bit of time sometimes because it's hitting the server and, of course, pulling down all the change logs. So it's pretty quick. And you'll get a very deep and detailed understanding of how the repository has actually changed, and specifically over time. You can then push all of that information out to Excel and XML and do your own reporting and analytics. That's all, of course, separate to any of the sort of server reporting we already have. So you can already do activity logs and things like that at the server side and understand how things are changing. But this is a way that the users, if they've got the right visibility and permissions, they can actually understand very deeply what is changing in the repository and when and by who and all that sort of stuff. So a recursive search, it's very powerful. Okay, the next one, number 8. This is again a feature that we had requested many times, and so of course we delivered it. with catalogs and with matrices, as I mentioned before, they're really just configurations. You're saying I want, for a catalog, you're saying I want these columns, I want it to be colored according to something, I want to have it sorted a certain way, I want to have it filtered a certain way, grouped a certain way. So they're all configuration concepts for a catalog. Previously, unless you were a designer, you weren't able to save any changes to those configurations. Now that was by design. Pardon the pun. It was basically trying to protect, of course, the way that a designer had set up the views. Just like a viewpoint can't be changed by every user, because otherwise you kind of defeat the purpose. A catalog, the column ordering and all those sort of things, a user could change that. There was no problem. They could reorder things, resort things, refilter things, but then they had to discard those changes when they closed it. So, if you went to the trouble of resorting things and filtering things to see things that were of interest to you, that was only session based, and as soon as you closed ABACUS, that was gone. So we've made a feature now in ABACUS that regardless of whether you're a designer or, importantly, a non-designer, you have this save as option. Okay, what that means, if you've changed some configuration around, if you're a non-designer, well, you still can't save, so there's no save button in here, but you can save as. So you can basically save any changes you've done to the configuration of a catalog or a matrix back into the repository, and of course recall it next time, and so it's obviously saved in the project. So you don't have to redo that. So it's really powerful. It's absolutely a configuration capability to people who don't have designer. So it breaks the model a little bit in terms of strictly sticking to designers being the only ones who can do it, but it's absolutely quite safe and it's a very useful feature. So you don't have to buy a designer license for people just to be able to reconfigure a catalog. So that's certainly the reality of it. The same works for matrices as well. So of course, if people change the grouping and the ordering and what they're showing and how they're coloring things and all that sort of stuff, what properties they're showing, that all can be saved as a new catalog or a new matrice. Now again, there may be some housekeeping there because every user potentially can create a kind of a copy of the catalogs. You may end up with lots of catalogs in there, one for each user even, which is fine, we don't mind. But someone might need to go through and clean that up a bit and question people about whether they really need to recreate a new one or whether an existing one is sufficient. But absolutely you're able to do it. If you don't want people to be creating new copies of matrices, remove the create permission because then they can't copy them and save them as. Okay. Number 9, what we're looking at here is the ability to define from an aesthetic point of view, the line ends. So when you're looking at a diagram, you might have an arrow or a crow's foot or something like that as the end of the lines. In the past, you had to basically decide according to the connection type how you wanted the line to look. So of course its color, its line style, whether it was dashed or anything like that, and also what its line ends were. So whether you wanted to have an arrowhead or a crow's feet or a circle or whatever. Now you're able to set the line ends according to a property on the connection. Okay, what does that mean? So let's say cardinality. Cardinality is a pretty typical thing you want to put on a connection. So we're talking about information modeling, one-to-manys, many-to-manys, all that kind of stuff. So if you have a property on there called cardinality, as you can see in this example here, what you can say is, look, if the value equals 1 to 1, I want the source end to be this symbol, this is like a crow's foot notation, a 1 here. Likewise, if it's 1 to many, I want it to be that. You can probably work out the logic here, of course. If it's a many to many, then I want it to be a crow's foot or a many to 1 or a many to many, and then you've got kind of the inverse at the other end. So basically, depending on the property value, you can show the line end differently. The other kind of use case for this quite typically is around interface diagrams and things like that, where you want to show the direction of a connection according to a property, or you want to show whether it's bidirectional or unidirectional. So of course, if it's bidirectional, you want an arrowhead at both ends. If it's unidirectional, you only want an arrowhead at the sync end. So in practice, it kind of looks like this with some sort of information model here. If you've got 1 to many as the property value of that connection, it'll show a 1 at this end and a many at that end. As opposed to a many to many here, where you'd have a many at that end and a many at that end. In the past, if you wanted to do that, you would have to split that connection into multiple types. Okay, so in this case, it'd be 4 different connection types, which is fine. It's just a bit of a maintenance overhead. So now you can do that according to a property. And you remember from the direct matrices, that value of the property could be being maintained through a matrix very easily. And so you could be changing the cardinality right there in a matrix, which of course would then influence the way it appears in a diagram instantly. So it's a powerful feature. It absolutely enables you to do various diagrams much more efficiently and much more quickly. Okay, last one of the 10 before we go and have a look at some sort of live stuff. Okay, so this last one is certainly a sort of back-end thing. It's around the command line usage of Abacus. So Abacus can be run from the command line. There's lots of use cases for that. The most common use cases are for setting up some auto things at the server end, so auto publishing to HTML, auto generation of reports, auto importing, exporting, synchronization of data with other repositories. So that sort of auto stuff is all run through the command line and batch jobs and things like that. So there's a few more options there now in the command line interface. So we have this first option, which is called Don't Show Dialogues. You can probably guess what it is. A quick word, it actually is very case sensitive, so we've had a number of users with the beta not type the capital S and capital D. So anyway, it's very case sensitive. Needless to say, that one is all about if you're when you're running it from the command line, there could be dialogues that are opening, so depending on what you're doing, you might be publishing, for example, so there might be some confirmation dialogue that comes up and wants you to click OK. So unless you've, in dialogues, you can click, don't show again. That was our previous recommendation was, if you don't want these dialogues to pop up, click the don't show again box. So if there were dialogues that you hadn't clicked the don't show again box for, though, these would pop up, and it would, of course, then require some user interaction. So now with this don't show dialogues option, it prevents those popping up. It just accepts the default value that you would have clicked, which, of course, is invariably okay, and everything continues on. So really useful, of course, for your publishing and anything that you might suspect has any dialogue or user entry or user involvement. The other one is this ability to authenticate at the command line. So now you're able to put in a username and a password. Okay, so again, particularly useful for publishing. So the recommendation we give when people publish to HTML, and indeed when they set up this auto publishing, as you absolutely should at the server end, is to define a role, so a public role or a publisher role. So basically a user which then has visibility or read ability of the content you want to have published. Okay, so it may not be everything. You take off the IP addresses of servers and whatever things. So there's whatever aspects, whole architectures you don't want to have published out. Whatever content you want to then have published under this public role is how you should, of course, authenticate when you publish. So now you absolutely can put in that user and its password, and I think that that's what this example is here. It shows that you might run Abacus here. You run a script to do the publish. Exit when it finishes. That was always the same as it was. Don't show any dialogues in case they're going to pop up, but log in here as a public user with password, whatever it is, 1 2 3 4 5 6. So absolutely, this is all done at the server end now, and it will just automatically publish every day, every hour, whatever it is. On you can do post-commit hooks and things. I don't know if you guys know about that, but you can definitely do all the server events at the server end. So every time someone commits, you could make it actually republish. There's nothing to stop you doing that. It's it could be a bit of a burden on the server, but these days it's usually pretty easy. Okay, so that's the 10 headline features I wanted to sort of talk you through. We've got about 10 minutes to go. I'm just looking at the clock here. So okay, I'll do a quick little demo of some of these features, and I guess we'll see where we go. I mean, I can see some questions coming in, so I'm not sure if I'll get time to do them, to be fair, today. Apologies for that. But we'll absolutely come back to you with answers to those as we go. But yeah, if anyone's got any last-minute questions, of course, fire them in. And like I said, unfortunately, I don't think we'll get to them today, but we absolutely can reach out to you afterwards and come back with some answers. Okay, so let's go and have a look at some of these features in Anger, I guess. So basically, there's 10 of them, so I kind of can jump around some of these a little bit. Let's have it start with a quick look at the replicas side of things. So if you remember, replicas are the ability to show the same component multiple times on a diagram. So this is that diagram you saw before. So if I'm just pin in place the Explorer view here. So this intranet component here, if I right click and go show in Explorer, that's the component there. So where it is, down here under the things. If I right click on this one and show in Explorer, it of course takes me to the same one. So it is the same element in the repository. It's just being shown many times. Okay. Right, so how do you create these replicas? There's a few different ways. I guess the easiest way is to just right click it and go create replica. Okay, so that'll just create one off to the side here. So I've got a new replica there. Okay, I can right click that to prove it and show that it's still just linked to the same thing. I can right click, actually I'll do that one next. So I'll do this first. I can drag if I drag something from the Explorer onto a diagram that's already on the diagram, it will just create a replica. So I drag intranet on again, so it'll ask me whether I want to connect it and things like that, but whatever, there it is, there's another version. If I right click that, it's still the same one. Okay, the other way you can create replicas, and this is something that's just you should think about and have a quick look at. If I copy it, so I copy that component, it's in the clipboard. If I right click and go paste, I can go paste as replica. Okay, so that's fine. It's just created another replica there. Okay, so I've got that again. But beware, so again, copy. If I now go paste, but if I just did Control V or paste, that will absolutely create a copy of that component. So it'll make a new repository component. Okay, so we haven't changed the default behavior. So in Abacus previously, Control C, Control V would of course copy the components. That's exactly the same. What we've added is basically this option here. Okay, so just beware of that when you're creating these things. Replicas are absolutely several ways of doing it. The other example I think I showed was the interface diagram way of doing things. So that's this one down here. Sorry, wrong one. The process diagram way of doing things, which is pretty typical. So here, these ERP HRMs, that's that component there. If I right click here, show an explorer, it's the same one there. Okay, so again, there's some intricacies around this. This is of course, we've got the lines connected to the individual instances. Right, so if I copy this guy, okay, go copy. If I go paste replica, paste as replica. Okay, of course it doesn't copy the connection. So that's the thing I want people to kind of appreciate. There's no concept of I don't want to duplicate that connection. I'm not creating a new component. But of course, if I do go copy and then paste, just like we always did before, that is going to create new copies of the connections. Okay, and not only the connection that it had directly to this one, but of course all of the connections that we had to that component. Okay. So just a few sort of things to bear in mind there when you're playing with these replicas, and just be careful with your Control C, Control V. That absolutely copies content in the repository, whereas just obviously right click, paste as replica doesn't. Okay, so that's replicas. Let's have a quick look at these line ends. I guess I'll do it on this one. I might as well. I've opened it already. So these connections here. So if you look at that connection there, it's showing two line ends here. If I go into the properties window here, it's reflecting. I could go and show you in the stencil. I think you've all seen this one before. It's reflecting this property here, this bidirectional property. So if I change that to now be unidirectional, okay, over here you can see it's lost that arrowhead at the end there. Maybe I'll do an undo and a redo so you can see it come back. So undo and a redo. Okay. So just as simple as that. If you want, that's a directionality one. You saw obviously the other one with the information model that it absolutely will change both ends if it needs to. It's however you set things up. Okay. So that's those line ends. Very very simple, but absolutely very powerful. Right. Let's have a quick look maybe at matrices. Let's go into. I'm just sort of acutely aware we've only got a couple of minutes to go. So yeah, certainly not going to get time. Apologies to get to your questions, and there's a fair few of them I can see in there. Sorry about that. But here we go with matrices. So this is a direct matrix, the one I showed, where we're showing applications connected through to servers. So these are a connection of the type is hosted at here. So if I hover over it here, you can see that the color is actually showing cost, and the value is showing that information environment. So if I click on that, you can see that I'll collapse the cost properties down, so you can see this live property here. Okay, so I guess I can change it here, and I'm sure you can expect it's going to change there. If I double click this, it brings up that little dialog, and I can change that, or maybe I'll make it a test value. So that's obviously changed the value there, changed it there. So a really simple, elegant way of changing connection properties right there in the matrix itself, which obviously affects the underlying properties here. So yeah, really, really good, simple little feature. And as you'd expect, you can push it out here, like I said, to Excel, and when you publish, it gets published out to HTML. Okay, matrices. Let's have a quick look at catalog configuration. So again, let's go into a catalog here, remembering that this is just catalog configuration. It's not, I probably won't do copying catalogs. It's obviously just Control C, Control V. It's not that surprising. Here though, if I reorder some columns, and maybe I hide that column, and then I change my filter to say, hey, I don't want to see everything. I just want to see Canada applications or whatever. So it's filtered it down to. So I'll get rid of this. Sorry. It's filtered it down to only be 32 of the 1,000 applications. Whatever, all that stuff. So someone's a Canadian application owner, and they're going through and changing properties. That's all they want to see. When they close it now, it gives you this extra option. Okay, so I'm a designer, so I can still save. I could actually save over the original one here by clicking save. If you're not a designer though, you don't get that option there. So if I go save as, then of course I can change this and go, okay, I want to have applications, where am I? And just the Canada version or something like that.
Okay, so what that's going to do is, of course, under catalogs, it's going to create it puts it in the same folder that the original one was in, if it was there. So you see it here because that's where the original one was. So here's my Canada application catalog again, and I can obviously keep doing that. So that's really powerful for, like I said, non-designers. The same thing happens with matrices as we just did with catalogs. Look, I've probably only got time for one more thing. So let me show you a cool feature here. This is basically an auto generation of diagrams feature. So you can produce many diagrams using some really powerful loud algorithms. So what we have is this ability to define what we call a template. It's basically a blank diagram with a title block on it with basically the areas that you want to populate. So we've said here we pretty much want everything: people, strategy, projects. So these are all top level groupings from our repository. So people here is the top level grouping here. So we said we want all that stuff. Then we have these utilities. We call them world according to. They're basically utilities that can auto generate diagrams according to some focus. So let's do a world according to each application using this as our template or our stencil. Okay. So I'll fire that. These are scripts that are deployed with the product. You'll find them under the scripts folder. So here we go. I'm doing a world according to applications. So Abacus is actually going through the repository now, and it's generating 1,000 diagrams. Seriously, 1,000 diagrams. There we go. Didn't take very long. There's 1,000 diagrams created. They'll appear here under that little folder you just saw appear. So here's 1,000 diagrams we just created. Okay, so let's have a look at one. So a CRM diagram. So this is the world according to the CRM application. So it's gone and discovered all of the content that's connected to it. So it's filled in each of these blank pigeonholes with all the things. So here's the platform services, here's the servers it runs on. So you get every aspect of the things as you'd like to understand them. So it's a very quick, very easy way to produce a lot of understanding. So let's say you've just uploaded a whole lot of content from Excel spreadsheets and things like that. You can generate your diagrams very, very quickly. Okay. I'll just do one more. We are out of time, so I'll do the last one. I'll do is this department one. So I've just done a whole world according to a different perspective, which is on a department by department basis. Okay, so here we go. We've got another folder full of these things called application landscapes. So I might just open one or two of them. So here we are looking at the world according to this department. Well, there's a collection of applications. If I do world according to this department, here's a collection of other applications. Again, they're coloured in this case according to I think the recommendation, and we're showing a date here, which is when they're going to get retired or something like that. So able to produce these things very quickly. You certainly could produce it without this box on it at all, so it would just have the applications there. So very easy to produce content very quickly. Thank you, everyone. We're out of time. Yep, I can see lots of questions in there, so we'll come back to you with that. Thank you for everyone who attended. As I said, this video will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. You can share it with all your friends. I guess I talked pretty quickly, so you can certainly play it a bit slower and understand everything, hopefully, that I've said. So thank you, everyone, and obviously download ABACUS 4.3 and enjoy.